In this past year, you've likely heard negative sentiment around Monster Hunter Wilds, and while some of it was blown out of proportion, a lot of it was also justified. But right now is the best time for you to jump into or return to the game, and I'll walk you through as to why this is. And to make it abundantly clear, this video is not sponsored or affiliated with Capcom in any way, shape or form. I'm just an average bloke giving his 2 cents. So why does Monster Hunter Wilds have such a bad rap, and where are we now? Well, the major thing, and honestly it's the tale of recent times, is performance. Now, regular viewers of the channel and active players are probably sick to death of hearing this, but if you're new looking to get into the game for the first time, or played it at launch and stopped, this might be of interest to you. So since we were in the Monster Hunter beta, Wilds has had a lot of performance issues primarily lying within PC. As far as I'm aware, consoles have had a much better experience along this route. Now during the beta we had a margin of error that we would allow Capcom to make with performance. After all, it was just the beta. From everything reviewers were saying and all available sources of information, it was looking like the launch version of Monster Hunter Wilds was going to be much better. However, despite this, the performance on launch day for many people was even worse than the beta. It's very unfortunate, however it's also quite common in recent times. Games tend to release in somewhat of rough shape, but at least the developers tend to fix it in ample time. But in this case, month 1 rolled by, still very much so the same issues. Month 2, no fixes. Month 3, you get the point. Now during this time Capcom were making efforts to address it, and pretty much every patch had an optimization within it. Yet for many of the PC players, the core issue wasn't solved, and it's likely to do with the engine the game is built on. However, especially within the past few months, the recent optimization patches for performance have seen very positive increments in frame rate. For many players, the game is now in a much more stable state, and I can confidently say as someone who engages with the community on a regular basis, I've noticed a lot less people are sharing that this is still an issue with the game. Now, I'm not going to lie to you, it definitely still is present, but we've also been promised within the next coming months in early 2026 that there will be further optimization. So chances are, if you have a decent rig capable of running modern games, you shouldn't have too many issues with Wilds at this point, and even if you are one of the few people that still do suffer, within the coming months this should hopefully be gone. But in the case of Wilds, it wasn't just performance that let the game down at launch. Now this is something I can attest to personally as someone who never had these frame rate issues, yet still started to slip down the slope of negativity. One of the core issues we suffered was the end game content loop. Your time in the end game is most valuable when it comes to Monster Hunter. You'll tend to get here in around 10 hours of playtime, and it's where you'll be for the next couple hundred. After all, the main attraction and pull of Monster Hunter is taking down these big boss-like enemies, taking their components to then go make new equipment. There's all these different weapons that completely offer a different change of playstyle, and every single hunt tends to feel dynamic from one to the other based on all sorts of different environmental factors. In the case of this game, however, we entered what was known as the Arkveld cycle. Now, out of the whole roster of Monster Hunter Wilds, originally there was pretty much around 4 monsters specifically that you would go and fight, and that's because they offered more rewards than anything else. But not just that, Wilds also suffered from a very big difficulty issue, and by difficulty I mean there was none of it. Universally, players agreed the game leaned on the easier side, with only a set couple monsters really offering any sort of resistance against the player. But when you reached a point that you're somewhat good at playing the game, even those couple of slightly challenging monsters became complete pushovers. So we ended up in this situation where we're fighting the same 2 things over and over again, just because they offer more rewards that we as the players didn't even need, and I'll touch on that a bit later. However, if you compare Wilds today to Wilds at launch, it's not even comparable. In fact, as of time of recording, we are already much further ahead than what base Monster Hunter World and Rise were at the exact same point in their life cycle. So many new fights have been added to the game, which inherently were way more difficult, but even further on top of that, new difficulty tiers were added intrinsically within the game as a system on top. Effectively what this means, even the monsters that we saw as pushovers at launch can now completely kick your ass. But don't get me wrong, if you don't want to engage with the hardest content in the game, you absolutely don't need to, and you can enjoy these new interesting fights as they are at their base level. Something to work your way up to as you get through every single piece of content in the game. But anyway, you might be thinking, Zenny, that's all good and well, but why am I going to waste my time fighting all these cool monsters outside of doing it for the first time? And that's a great question, because once again at launch, I wouldn't really have an answer for you. And that's the reason I think most active players started to walk away from the game. But you're probably noticing the trend of this video, we are no longer in that situation. And the most recent update, titled Update 4, has only gone above and beyond. So originally, the only system we had to grind was what are known as arcane weapons. Essentially, it's a customizable weapon, but the customization aspect of it was extremely limited. It would take you all but a couple hours for you to have a weapon that does the job you need it to. You could then strive for a god roll version, in which every single stat is rolled perfectly, but there wasn't particularly a need to do that with everything we've just discussed. But now, everything is much different. So in the last 8 or so years that I've been playing Monster Hunter, I have never seen this much build diversity in a base game. First off, we got RNG talismans, which are effectively a piece of equipment that can roll various different skills. At launch, you could only craft a fixed talisman with a fixed skill, but now, much like in Monster Hunter Rise, we have the potential to roll multiple different skills on one talisman, which in isolation wasn't a huge shift in the meta or way we approach the game, but it was a good step. But Title Update 4 changed everything. With the addition of the new Elder Dragon God Mazios, a couple new systems came along with him. First up is the Gogma Artian system. This is a system that builds on the Artian weapons I touched on briefly just now, in which we can further upgrade them to now intrinsically roll unique monster and group skills on them. If you're not too familiar with Monster Hunter, you might not know what this means. Effectively, when you're putting together your build with the various different pieces of armor sets, there are inherent set skills built within the pieces you need to look out for. As an example, crafting 2 or 3 pieces of the same set will then activate a background skill that tends to give the player their biggest jump in power. Of course, the downside of doing this is you also have to commit multiple armor slots to that one armor set. But now, we can just roll one of those skills on the weapon, which frees up an additional armor set piece to go for even more useful skills, or to activate a completely additional set bonus. And you know what further elaborates on this build diversity upgrade is we can now transcend older pieces of armor sets. Again, if you're unfamiliar, basically different armor in the game has different tier values attached to them. The easiest way to understand this is an armor set you get early on in the game is going to be a much lower tier than something you got from the end game. Now of course it would only make sense that the stuff you can get from the first couple hours of the game is going to be somewhat weaker than the end game. And even so, some of these pieces do have very strong set bonuses attached to them. The skills they offer and the decoration slots they offer, which allows you to put additional skills in, tended to be lacking and therefore not worth sacrificing a whole piece to go for this older bonus. In a sense, the stats of using a higher tier armor piece completely outweighed the unique set bonus of the early stuff. But Capcom implemented what I see to be one of the best updates Monster Hunter's ever had. We can now transcend these older pieces of armor, upgrading them and bringing them to an endgame level. Now all of a sudden, sets that had absolutely no place in the game are completely relevant in the meta, and being as we can also activate these skills on our weapon, the amount of different combinations we can achieve is truly endless. So to recap all of that, the game is much more stable, there's tons of stuff to do in the endgame, and new or returning players can experience all of the title update content that's came out since launch in one go. And once again, to make it blatantly clear, I'm not sponsored when I say this, but with the Steam winter sale and likely other platforms running similar game sales, Monster Hunter Wilds is currently the most affordable it's been since launch. So if anything I've said today is appealing to you, now is probably the best time to jump in, because who knows when the next time will be that the game will be on sale for this price. And just as a reminder, by the way, the previous titles like World and Rise are also extremely good places for you to start if you've never touched the game before. So if you don't want to commit to buying Wilds yet, trust me, if you go buy World and Iceborne or Rise and Sunbreak, you're going to have an equally amazing time. I saw earlier today on the Switch too, you can buy Monster Hunter Rise and Sunbreak as a bundle for like £8 my currency. Now if you ask me, getting anywhere from 100 to 2,000 hours of gameplay for £8 is a pretty damn good deal. So yeah, do what you will with this information, always do your own research, make your own decisions, but my personal recommendation, if you want to get back into Monster Hunter or get into it for the first time, buy Monster Hunter Wilds on sale now. If your performance seems stable, great, continue playing Wilds. If it doesn't seem so good, refund the game on Steam, go buy Rise or World, and then try Wild in another few months after the further optimization patches come out. In the 2 years I've been doing YouTube, I've never made a video like this where I'm pretty much just trying to sell you the game. But honestly, this is my favourite game franchise of all time, and it has so much potential to be even better. Inevitably, Wilds will have an expansion coming out probably at the end of 2026 or early 2027. So I'd wager you have a good year to experience the franchise however you like, so you're ready to join all of us for what I imagine to be a pretty high player peak. But yeah, I think that's going to be enough yapping from me today. I'm starting to sound like a used car salesman, so I'll stop myself early. But let me know in the comment section down below, how is your current experience with Wilds, and what would you recommend to a new player? I hope you're all enjoying the holiday season. Thanks for watching.